Hi there, my name is Allison Fay. I serve as the director of Jacob Wetterling Resource Center. And today we're going to be talking about teen resources for online connections during COVID-19. Now, just before we even start, when I'm normally doing work with young people, with teens, with junior high students, with high school students, online um, concerns, it's usually far more the ability to talk back and forth. I know you all have your own experiences, your own expertise, things that you've lived that have helped teach you how you can help other people. And it's not super effective to just have one person talking versus the back and forth. But we kind of just are trying to make some of these, just make this work with the ability to do the online training this way. So if this is something that you watch with your class and then your class has a chance to stop and pause and discuss some of these things, that's great. If you watch as a family, if you and a friend have watched it, I know that it's not ideal to just hear someone talking at you. It's much more effective to be talking with somebody, which I appreciate, but figured that this is better than not having a conversation at all. So thank you for your patience as we have a conversation about internet safety. And just to give you a little bit of background, I am with the Jacob Wetterling Resource Center. We are named after Jacob Wetterling, who went missing from Minnesota, from central Minnesota, St. Joseph in 1989. And his family, after having experienced what it's like to lose someone as a result of someone else's horrible choices, started a nonprofit very early following his abduction, saying we want to help make sure that kids can grow up and have safe childhoods, that teens can grow up and have, safe lives, and that we grow up to not harm each other. And so the work that I do at Jacob Wetterling Resource Center is in honor of Jacob and his legacy, and that even just that word legacy, what is the legacy that we create? When people think of our name, they think of us as someone who is kind, who is a good friend, some of the things that Jacob was for the people who loved him. And so when we think about what we're doing online, a lot of it is we're creating an online footprint. We're leaving behind our own kind of legacy. And technology itself isn't a bad thing. We use cell phones, we use laptops, whatever it is right now during COVID as a way of getting education, as a way of staying connected to peers. I mean, there's a lot of positives for online, resources, but it's how we use them. We think of the internet just like any tool, and you wouldn't use a blowtorch, hopefully, unless you had training in how to use a blowtorch, unless you had experience, unless you had the right gear, unless you had someone who has done it before, who's showing you how to do it safely. And we want to think about tools in the same way, where we don't just want to, jumping off the deep end. It really is, if you think about when you started with technology when you were young and the mistakes that we made and how that was able to shape making better choices. And we want to make sure that we're using technology to help versus hurt. Just like a car can be the reason that somebody is sent to the hospital, or it could be the way that it gets them to the hospital. It's not the car that's the problem. It's who's behind the wheel and what training do they have, and how aware are they of their power behind the wheel and what they can do with that power. And it's the same thing with technology. When you're behind your phone, when you're behind your tablet or whatever it is that you're using, it's not the technology that's making the choices that help or hurt. It's us, and to stay connected with brains and hearts as we do that. It's important also to remind ourselves that we all have a voice in prevention. You don't have to wait until you're an adult to start shaping the world. You shape your online cultures every day. People hold each other accountable. People remind each other, whatever the terms are in a specific group or specific, there are standards of behavior, and people push back and people help, people live by those. And 12 to 17-year-olds, you all create your own cultures of what is the expectation, what is okay, and you all have a voice in prevention. We know that 12 to 17-year-olds are the age that are most at risk for crimes happening to them. It actually flips back and forth between 12 to 17 and 18 to 24, and it kind of goes back and forth between those two age groups. When people think child safety, they often think little kids. We know, especially with online crimes, it's really the 12 to 17-year-olds that are most at risk. And at this point, if we're in a room together, I would ask you all why you think 12 to 17-year-olds are the most at risk. Some of the things that I hear when I'm having dialogues with other students is just the fact of being online a lot, having the access. Other people saying the thoughts about being easily led in peer pressure, or, being asked to do something and not necessarily thinking it through. I mean, it really, that 12 to 17-year-olds, that's so broad. There are there are 16-year-olds who I trust behind the wheel of a car, and there's 16-year-olds who I don't. And it's not necessarily all teenagers anything. Like, just like there's no such thing as all grown-ups do this or all kids do this. Like, teens get a lot of negative energy poured your way. And there are some of you who are doing a phenomenal job as kind, compassionate friends to other people. And so when we think about this, when we're thinking really broadly, why are they be targeted? I know that some folks would say, well, I'm not easily led, or I'm not, I don't necessarily act in a way that could cause harm. And I want to be careful to not say, this isn't about victim blaming by any means. There are parts of being 12 to 17 and the risks that are coming your way that it can be really hard to navigate, and that adults and other peers might take advantage of you because of that. And it's not your fault. It's just the way that this is set up. The part of your brain that says, is this a good idea? I'll come back to that. But the part of your brain says, is what I'm typing right now a good idea? Is the last part to be done. But yet we hand you tools that say, how are you feeling right now? What are you thinking right now? When we talk to little ones about body safety, and we're spending time in elementary schools, we talk a lot about that gut instinct, uh-oh feeling, and paying attention to that even as we're getting older. But knowing that in these years, your brain starts really arguing against your gut. When you watch a horror movie and there's the scene where like, first like, I'm gonna go out in the garage and see what this noise is. And everyone's like, don't go out in the garage. It's that, and you would watch it and be like, don't go out in the garage. But it's the part of your brain that starts arguing, like, don't be stupid, it should be fine. I've been in the garage 100 times before. We tend to dumb down what our gut instinct is telling us. When our gut and our brain are fighting back and forth what to do, step away and let your gut and your brain catch up, because your gut is usually giving you warning signs for a reason. And when I started talking about internet safety with students in like 2001, the number one question I would get from parents is, should we get a computer or not? Should we get access? Should we not? I haven't heard that question like a decade. Right now, a lot more of what I'm hearing about is balance, and parents saying, how can we help our kids create balance so they're not always on their screens? And I know in a pandemic, it's extra hard, but we think about how can we create balance so that our self-worth isn't tied to our followers or our likes, because that's exhausting. Always trying to create more content for people to engage in, that keeps raising the bar and can be really exhausting. And thinking about, this particular study is one example. The more time that girls in this study spent with their screens, the less sleep they got and the lower their self-esteem. This is another place where if you're watching this in a classroom or with peers, pause for a minute and have a conversation. Why do you think it is that the more time we spend with our screens, the less we feel good about ourselves? And when I'm in schools, I hear really interesting conversations just about comparison culture, of always trying to compare and feeling left out. If people do something and they're live streaming what they're doing, used to not be invited. Now because it's very much sort of in your face, even if it's not intentional. The message that we've been giving for years about creating an online footprint that can be something that's positive, that opens up doors of opportunity to you, can make people feel the pressure of always trying to look perfect online, always trying to be put together and polished. And then some people talking about just celebrity culture, and you're trying to, stay at the same caliber as people who have stylists, and people choosing their wardrobe, and people making sure they have the right light. Like, it's not an even playing field. And just that sense of, we want to have a balance. We want to have times in our life where we're not on our screens, we're not with our tablets, so we can really engage in conversations with friends. Now, I know right now in COVID, friend conversations are screen-based or phone-based, so it's not quite the same thing. But those ideas of, stepping away from your computer and going on a run, or stepping away from your computer and working on an art project, stepping away from your phone and really working on this paper that needs to get written for a class, and not checking until it's done, so that the ability of our brain to try to track doesn't get distracted. We want to create that balance of times with technology and times away, so that we aren't reliant on our technology for how we see ourselves in the world. So whatever your passion or your hobbies might be, finding time to engage in those, because when you're, creating something or trying to get a personal best time in something, like, you're focused on that and you have a break from screens. And maybe just putting a list, like, in your phone or by the, fridge or wherever in your house that you look, of, let me think of 12 things that I love to do that don't have anything to do with technology, so that when I'm sitting here bored, I'm not just going right away to scrolling all the time, but I can look and think of some other ideas of this recipe I really want to try that I might forget about. And then when we're really riled up or really emotional, to step away from our screens and do something else. Young people make the most mistakes that then create an online footprint that causes harm to other people when they're really worked up about something. And so I fully realize adults in the culture have to do a better job of stepping away from our screens when we're upset, but finding things to do that don't involve technology when you're really worked up is a big prevention piece for not being the one causing the harm. Because, and I, you know, you think about, I think about things that I did, and the internet wasn't invented until I was in my senior year of high school. So I didn't have the same temptations and the same pressure that young people have now. And it's really mind opening for me to hear about the experience that you all have and how you're trying to navigate it and what it feels like. But I remember doing things in high school or junior high when I was really upset that I look back at now and I'm like, oh, that was so, can't believe I did that. That was so stupid. That was so hurtful or whatever. And then, but I didn't have that same like proof of this is, you know, here is what I said, here's how it played out, and it's there for anyone to see. It was more of me doing something stupid and then later realizing that I need to make amends for that, and it being a lot more private and a lot more just between a very small group of people. And so paying attention to walking away when we're really upset. Being aware of your sleep, you know, and I know some people are getting a lot more sleep during a pandemic than they've ever got. I know a lot of people are getting a lot less sleep. Like, it really just depends. But knowing that teenagers need the most sleep of any of us and are often getting the least amount. So maybe when you're thinking about what balance looks like, maybe it is that the phones, you know, go in the kitchen, get recharged overnight so that you have a chance to just really sleep. Making your parent the bad guy and be like, sorry, our Wi-Fi goes off at 11 p.m. and goes back up at 6 a.m. So if you want to reach me during those hours, I just can't connect. Like, that's thinking of ways to create balance for yourself so that you're getting sleep, because this is an exhausting time for everybody, and let alone when you're not getting any sleep because of technology. I think it's important to point out quite a few teens think their parents also spend too much time on their phones. This is not just a teenager issue. It's all of us trying to find balance. And I'm working on that myself as well. And when we look at just the big picture when it comes to sleep, if you have your device in your bed or near your bed, that leads to inadequate sleep, poor sleep, and really tired during the daytime. So thinking of ways that to create that space around bedtime is a really healthy thing to start now. It's much easier to start now and then build as you get to be older versus trying to break that habit down the road. And I talked briefly about the teenage brain earlier, but I think for me, when we have discussions about brain development, it helps people sort of feel a little bit less like they're like something's wrong with them, in the sense of all of us are different. We all see the world in different ways. We have people who are very neurodiverse, where brains work differently and hearts, you know, it's, but just having a general sense of that adults and teen brains do work differently. When adults are having a conversation and diving into an issue, they're thinking the rational part, teens respond with the emotional part. So if you've ever been talking to a parent or caregiver, they're trying to have a conversation with you logically, and you just like, you know, go from 0 to 10 really quickly, your brain is kind of moving into fight or flight and going to that emotional part of what's happening. And so when you have overwhelming emotional input, you don't always think through what you're doing. It's more of an emotional heart reaction versus brain reaction. And so starting to be aware of that and starting to help your brain stop and breathe and chill when big things are happening. One of the other discussions that we have is that we don't live in a culture that makes it very easy to ask for help if something is happening online that's making you feel unsafe. There are people who have intentionally try to make other people feel unsafe or freaked out on devices. They do that through comments, they do that through messages, they do that through photos. And a lot of it is that isolating behavior where they try to separate you from people that you can talk to and make it just about them. Like, can't tell anyone about this but me. This is our secret. That kind of isolating behavior in dating relationships, in friendships, in mentoring relationships that gets dangerous really quick. If you notice someone's isolating you, like healthy people want to be a part of one of many people who care about you, unhealthy people want it to be just about them. So if you're spending time with someone who's like, we can only hang out if it's you and me, we can't, I don't like it when you spend time with this person, I need to check in on what you're doing with your phone, like that isolating and controlling behavior goes from, escalates very quickly and can be really feeling dangerous. And then because they've successfully isolated you from folks to tell, you don't know who to tell. And so even though it's not a kid or a teen's fault, if someone makes them feel safe online, most young people don't know that they have the right to tell. And this would be another point where we'd pause and I'd get your input of why do you think that is? And how can we make it easier? And I've heard a lot of interesting conversations from young people over the years just about how they want to look like they know what's going on. It's like, I'm the one when there's daylight saving times who changes all the clocks in my house. My parents don't know how to. Like, I should be able to figure this out. And understanding the technology and understanding human behavior are two different things. And the human behavior piece comes as we get older and we're in more friendships, in more relationships, and we meet more people who can be toxic or unhealthy. And adults have more experience with meeting people who can be toxic or unhealthy than we do. Than kids or teens may. And so knowing that you have the right to ask for help, and the number one reason that I've had people say that they don't ask for help when they need it is they say, if I ask for help, someone will take my phone away or someone will take my laptop away. So having some of those hypothetical questions with the people who you would reach out to for help before there's a problem, and sort of setting those baseline pieces can be really, really helpful. We used to start talking about internet safety, right as it was forming as beginning. Our conversation beginning was just like, don't put stuff online you wouldn't want to see in a billboard. And that's still a place to start, but then we get into all the ideas of the reason when people are sending photos that later they think, oh, I probably shouldn't have sent that photo, or people are sending texts that later they're like, oh, that was probably really hurtful, maybe even like sexist, racist, like those kinds of things that people do when they're really worked up, when they're not thinking about feelings, they're not thinking about the humanity of the other person. Sometimes we do that because we're worked up, and that's not okay. That's about teaching our brain to stop and breathe and chill and stepping away from our technology if we're going to do something that's really hurtful. And the other flip side of that is young people often make those choices when they feel like they're being coerced. And coercion is that feeling of like being backed into a corner and feeling like you have to be in a relationship with someone, or feeling backed into a corner and feeling like I have to do this to be liked. And anytime people act because they're coerced, they're not acting from who their true self is, then it can become really dangerous in the sense of people doing things that are past where they feel comfortable. People are doing things that can put themselves at risk and at danger. So when we have conversations about not putting stuff online we wouldn't want to see in a billboard, it's also about having conversations about what does coercion feel like. If I'm in a friendship or a relationship with someone who's forcing me or pressuring me to do something that I don't think I should be doing, who can I reach out to for support? The flip side of coercion is consent, when both people are equally matched and equally excited about whatever it might be that's happening. And so we want to be thinking about that flip side for coercion and consent as we move through this. One piece of the puzzle is to be aware that sending sexual pictures when you're under 18 can be considered against the law, and not all states prosecute those kinds of cases. So, that's a whole nother discussion that we would have. But when we think about the why, like this is a study of college students who said, I didn't know that could be against the law. If I would have, that probably would have prevented me from taking photos like that. So we want to give that piece of the puzzle of, yep, it could be problematic legally, but we also want to look at the bigger piece of the puzzle of why do we even have laws like that? And sadly, there are people out there who do hurt kids and make the decision to hurt kids. And when they do that, some of them, buy, sell, trade images of kids being harmed or images of kids that are sexual. We do not want to be adding more supply and demand. We do not want to be adding more fuel for that fire. We don't want to be creating images that young kids will be shown by someone with bad intentions and say, look how happy they look in this picture. Can you try to look like them? Like it's a part of, first of all, that idea of not, when we're being coerced to do something, to recognize that feeling and know that you can ask for help and that it's not okay for someone to make you feel that way. But it's also that idea of we don't want to do things online that can cause harm to ourselves or to other people. And sending sexual pictures when you're under 18 can cause harm to yourself and can cause harm to other people. And so it's good behavior to avoid as a means of, as you're building your online footprint. And if you have experience where someone has forced you into sending pictures like that, it's okay to ask for help, to reach out to your school counselor via a message if you're doing remote learning, to reach out to a caregiver if you have a caregiver that you can talk to, reaching out to a mental health provider if you have a regular counselor, things like that. Looking for someone in your safety net, a relative, a friend of a parent, a parent of a friend, am I saying that right? A friend's parent, someone who you can say, this happened and I need to now get some help in rebuilding my online footprint and rebuilding trust, because that when someone, you send a picture like that privately and they send it out to everyone, that's a huge violation of trust. It shouldn't happen and isn't okay. And the number one reason that young people do send sexual pictures is because they feel pressured or coerced. And so again, the flip side of coercion being consent. Consent isn't always, people will often jump to like, oh, consent means talking about sex. It doesn't always mean talking about sex. Teaching a 3-year-old to not pull the dog's tail and saying, look at how the dog doesn't have the words to say no, but its body seems really uncomfortable right now. Its body seems really, worried, and it's making a noise it doesn't like when you do that. So let's give the dog some space. Let's talk about how we treat the dog in a way that's healthy and that's okay. And let's have conversations about how the dog gets to feel safe in its own body. And that's not even a discussion about sex or sexuality. It's just a discussion about respect. It's a discussion about safety. It's about paying attention to body signals. If you're sitting next to somebody and you're sitting really close, right now during COVID, someone is likely going to, with their body, move away and create some space. They might not have the words to say it because they don't want to offend you, or their body, it's just sometimes easier to move than to say anything. And then you have some people who just freeze when they're overwhelmed. We don't want to take a freeze response, meaning that they're okay with what's happening. We want to check in. Are you okay? Oh, you need me to create some space. As we begin to learn as we get older, the importance of reading body language and confirming body language verbally. So that it's not just that you're waiting for a no, because some people never say no because they don't want to say no and they don't want to make you mad at them. But it's confirming that a yes, that they're comfortable with what's happening, and confirming that the yes is enthusiastic. They don't feel pressured or painted into a corner. So if you're using social networking profiles, obviously we want to avoid the private information of like address, phone numbers, but the private information doesn't tend to put us at nearly as much risk as the emotional information. It's the emotional information of no one likes me, no one cares about me, that puts us at more risk. And I'll talk about why that is. People who want to cause harm online are looking for people who they think that they can shape, that they think that they can define what healthy looks like for that young person. If they can shape the relationship in a way where that person has all the control, then they get to call the shots. And so that emotional information gives those folks some ammunition of how to call the shots in those relationships. So when we're thinking about personal information, that's one step. It tends to not put us at much risk. It's the emotional information. So paying attention to, am I really worked up before I type this? If so, I need to breathe and wait a little bit. Avoiding problematic photos. We talk about creating an online footprint that opens up doors of opportunity instead of closing doors. If I hire for a summer camp and I do a Google search and I see stuff, I'm like, yeah, I do not want that person to be our lifeguard. Versus from the initial search, things look good, so I'm going to bring that person in for an interview. We want to avoid hateful language. There is enough of it online. Everybody is worthy of respect, and so avoiding language that makes people feel unsafe about who they are and what they're about is just not okay. And I'm fully aware adults need big lessons in that as well. I try to just not read the comments on most things because it makes me weep for humanity. So it's a good self-care skill. Avoid your birth year. You don't want to like advertise the fact that you're a minor, and also people who do like identity theft and things like that need month, day, and year of birth. Avoid your schedule in the sense of here's where I am all the time. I work on these days. I have practice on these days. It's okay to have an air of mystery about you. We often see that schedule coming into play as a safety risk when people are trying to get out of a friendship or trying to get out of a relationship. That person always seems to be where they are. Be aware that every app has its own risks. So do your homework in the sense of Google the apps, talk to people who've used them. What's the pros? What are the cons? And then also be aware every online problem has solutions. I always would say like online and real world and whatever, and young people have pushed back on that for valid reasons and said online is our real world. Like it's not some fake world. It's our friends, it's our people. So online problems do have solutions. If you're feeling overwhelmed about something that happened online, you're allowed to ask for help. You don't have to take it on all by yourself. What ifs are a great way to have conversations before there's ever a problem, to sort of think through and build skills of how to navigate things. You know, and here's a list. We have a bunch on our website with suggestions as well. But having what if conversations with caregivers and parents is a great way of skill building, and with peers as well. Thinking about who are the 5 people that you can go to. Every kid, every teen, every parent, every person in the world should have 5 different people they can reach out to if they need help. That way, if it's the person on the net who's causing the harm, you have 4 more people. If the first person you tell doesn't know how to help you and it's over their head, you have 4 more people. But to keep reaching out until you find someone who can help you. Be aware the number 1 lure online is attention and affection, which is horrible because everyone needs attention and affection to thrive. But people who are trying to hurt other people online use attention and affection as a trap, where it's, I will love you if you do this thing. I will care about you if you keep the secret. People who love you without strings, you know, with no strings attached. It's not, I will love you if, it's, I will love you and I'm here for you and I'm your friend, versus I will love you if you send me this picture or whatever it happens to be. Pay attention to things that seem too good to be true. You know, if it's a pop-up ad that says click here and you'll get a free trip to whatever, often you won't, and it'll just bring more spam. So like if something seems too good to be true, fact check, pay attention, or if a person seems too good to be true, pay attention to that as well online. And then healthy people want to be a part of your net and not separate you from your net. When we start teaching body safety with really young kids, the 2 questions that we start are basically, what am I being asked to do and what is my gut telling me? It's not, do I know them or not? Because often the people who cause us the most harm are people that we know and like, people who we've been in relationships with, or people that are in our classes, or people that we know socially. It's people who have met us, who've connected with us, that tend to cause us more harm than people that we don't know. And so yes, there are people that we don't know that might cause harm as well, but it's not, do I know them or not? It's, what am I being asked to do and what does my gut tell me? If you're asking me doing something that you don't think you should do, or goes against your core beliefs, or goes against what your expectations are as a family for how you use technology, doesn't matter who they are, you have every right to ask for help. And it's the same thing if your gut is telling you this is just getting weird real quick, pay attention to that. It's a body signal to yourself to pay attention. And pay attention again to your emotional information versus your personal information. We want to, do our best to keep both, where we're using the internet in a way that doesn't give out a ton of personal information about us, but also be aware that emotional information can be more harmful. And when offenders are trying to meet kids online, the number 1 thing that they're looking for is kids who want to talk to them about sex and will answer questions about sex. So any person who's trying to start conversation with you or build as that's the main part of the conversation, huge warning flag. If they're doing it to you, they're probably doing it to other kids. So doing a report on, Cyber Tip Line, if you Google Cyber Tip Line, there's a place where you can do a report if someone's trying to engage with you in a way that they shouldn't, or reaching out to, if you're back to when we get back into in-person learning, reaching out to someone in your IT department at school, or reaching out to a caregiver, whatever it might be, because if they're doing that to you, they're probably trying to, a lot of kids wait to see who is going to respond. And then also adults asking for sexually explicit images, or just pouring on that attention and affection so that you want to talk to them all the time. We see some adults sending sexually explicit images, then asking kids to send them back. And you don't have to. Like, they'll say, like, oh, it's not fair if you don't. Like, no, you don't have to. That's not an expectation. They don't get to define what that looks like. You get to define what healthy is. And healthy in that context is for sure being allowed to set a boundary and walk away. And so it's important to have quality information about bodies, and about how bodies work, so that it's not, you're not getting it from a person in a chat app at 3 p.m. So, books, resources, asking parents about that, asking, whatever you might be covering in health, or asking for extra resources, looking at websites that are valid, often ending in .org, and that can help give some of the information about health, because we need to understand how our bodies work in a way that is healthy, so that we can move towards healthy and try to avoid folks trying to redefine healthy for us in a way that's really sketchy. And offenders are also looking for kids who are online all the time and needing that attention and affection. So again, creating that balance can be really helpful. Even if you're trying to do everything to stay safe online and you meet someone who is make you feel unsafe, it's not your fault, and you can ask for help. There are laws intended to keep kids safe online. And so when we think about how laws play into our behavior, be aware that there's dangers in sending or receiving sexual photos. And I want to talk briefly about that. I might wait a slide or two, I'll come back to that. And if someone is using technology to isolate you or to harm you, reach out. There can be, depending on the scenario, there can be laws that can help protect you. Being aware of having like escape plans. If you are in over your head, having something that you text your caregiver to let them know you need to get picked up, no questions asked, so that, or, sometimes parents will just say, I'm finding the bad guy. Like if everyone wants to jump off the bridge and you're like, I can't, because if I jump off the bridge, I'll never get to hang out with you guys again. Like, feel free to make me be the bad guy if you're going to do something that you're worried is stupid or dangerous. Be aware that everything that we do online and in our relationships can either have a positive effect that ripples out or a negative effect. And we want to create a legacy, as we were talking about at the beginning about legacy, that when people think about us, it's positive. When someone looks at a high school yearbook, they're not going to remember everyone's name, but they're going to remember how people made them feel. Be very aware with texting and driving that puts people at huge risk, and it is a tempting thing to do when you're trying to stay connected. Hand the phone to someone else, ask them to reply, wait till where you go to where you're going. It's not worth it, and it absolutely escalates behavior really quick that gets really dangerous and puts people's lives at risk every single day. And then pay attention to consent. There are laws that tell us as humans in this world that we can't force people to do things with their body that they don't want to do. And so we don't want to use coercion and isolation to back someone in a corner so that they're doing things that they otherwise wouldn't want to do. And it's not just about teaching people how to say no. No is a complete sentence. We're talking about our bodies. No, that's all. You don't need the word because after the word no. No can stand alone. But it's not just about teaching people to say no. It's about teaching people to not put other people in a position where they feel like they have to say no all the time, right? And so the example I'll give is I was at an 8th grade several years ago, and a girl was talking about someone she had met, kept asking her to send a picture of herself without her shirt on. And she'd run out of ways to say no. She's like, I've run out. I can't think of a way to say no that I haven't already come up with. And every time I come up with a reason why I don't want to, they come up with a reason why I should, and I've run out of reasons. And so I sort of threw the question back to the other young people in the room. I said, what do you think? The first person just said, well, dump them. Like if they're not respecting no on the phone, they're not going to respect no in the same space. And other people are talking about, well, you should be in relationships with people who respect you, and that doesn't sound very respectful. It was a good conversation. But one young man raised his hand. He said, well, do you feel comfortable giving me that guy's number? Because we should spend maybe less time telling you how to say no to him, and someone just needs to call him and tell him to stop asking you. And I think that's that piece with consent is us reaching out and helping set a new norm with friends of they deserve to be treated with respect. And those what ifs are so important because when we look at sort of how the teenage brain works is there's a difference between I think I know what I would do and I know what I would do if something like this happened. And young people tend to overestimate their thinking of, yep, I would have this covered if I was in a relationship that started getting really sketchy. I would know that what I would do about that. But then actually thinking through what are the steps and what that look like, we can get stuck. And so going from the thinking I've got it covered to actually talking through with friends. Do you have anyone who you know who's been through this? How did they handle it? Defining healthy and starting to realize, or you've probably realized that all online problems have solutions. And if you are that empathetic, kind friend who everyone goes to with their problems, be aware you are also allowed to ask for help. It can be really exhausting if you have great listening skills and you are very compassionate to be unloaded on by everybody's struggles. And that can happen quite a bit with the one person who's like good at being just that present listener. Think of it as a backpack full of problems. You can only carry so much. And especially if it's problems where someone might be hurt, you're allowed to ask for help and have someone help you unload that backpack. That's not being a bad friend. Adults seek out other resources all the time. When our friends are struggling, you're allowed to do that as well. being aware that it is tempting sometimes to seek out material that is intended for adult-only audiences, especially if that material is explicit. Be aware that we can't unsee stuff. Once you've seen something, you can't unsee it. And I could tell stories of like horror movies that I was not old enough to watch yet that I watched anyway, and just how that impacted dreams and other things. And we think about how part of the allure of sexually explicit images is it reduces people from being a person to just their body parts. And when we see people as objects and just body parts, it's a lot easier to hurt body parts and objects than actual people. And keeping people's heads and souls and hearts inside of them and not engaging with material that reduces them just to bodies can help us in our relationships with other people see people as who they really are, and meet people where they're at and build quality relationships, as opposed to, pornography is a lot of things, but realistic and healthy are not two of those things. So it should not be your sex education to watch explicit videos, because it's not something that should be replicated. It's not what is realistic. And so, protecting your head and your heart as you are building those relationship skills on your own without jumping to what isn't realistic. So the power of stepping away is important. What do your words and images say when you're online? And there's no such thing as like a sarcasm font. So sometimes we can offend someone without even trying to, and owning that when that happens, and staying connected to friends. Doing a self-check, am I being treated with respect here? Even if they've been your friend for 10 years, if they're going through a rough patch and you are the person who's getting all of their negative energy, you're allowed to take a break. That doesn't make you a bad friend. Are you in over your head? If hurting is happening, someone's hurting you, hurting someone else, is trying to hurt somebody else, that's when we get other people involved. And who are your point people? You do not have to just, it's past your pay grade. If you're in a relationship and someone says, well, I'm going to hurt myself if you don't do this thing, like we need to get other people involved. You don't have to be the lightning rod in that. I talked about this before, just the sense of, with the example of the kids in that church where the girl was talking about, oh, I tried to say no and I can't say no, and he keeps asking. We spend so much time at the tip of the iceberg of like helping her say no. We forget to spread out to what really works, to the core of that iceberg, and find the person who's causing the harm and give them another option. Hey, this behavior, this stuff they're doing right now is coming across as really isolating, and that's really sketchy. And we need, let's talk about what that looks like. Or finding the people who are the bystanders who are standing up, going from bystanders to upstanders. To be a bystander to an upstander doesn't mean you go after the person causing harm. That usually makes it worse. How do we support the target? Is it a text message saying, I'm sorry, people are being horrible right now. If you want to hang out with my group of friends, this blows over, you can. Is it, just reaching out and letting them know that, this is a really hard time during COVID. And I know that this is a hard time as you're getting out of this relationship. If you ever need some process, I'm here. It's not about going after the person causing the harm and escalating. It's about supporting the target. The more people watching something bad play out, the less likely someone helps. It's like when we learn CPR, someone points at someone and says, call 911, because then that helps like break the ice and moves people. And so sometimes being the first person with a group of friends saying, hey, sorry this is happening to you, how can we be helpful right now? Makes them feel less alone and creates that culture where people can feel safe. And that bystander, upstander, it's a skill that takes both learning and then practicing. And so what ifing some of that as well, thinking about the more people around, the less likely people react, or they'll react slower. And then thinking about what that might look like online. So it's not about getting in the ring and escalating and adding more fuel to the fire. It's about this person right now is in a place where they're being targeted. I don't want people to feel this way who go to my school. How can I make them feel more connected? And how can I, not by myself, make people feel more connected to, and getting a group of people together. There's a story from a few years ago, King Central High School in Canada, where a young boy, I shouldn't say boy, he was in 9th grade, young man wore a pink shirt to school on the first day. And other kids teased him and called him names and picked on him. And so we go back to, well, the tip of the iceberg is telling him he should wear pink, but that's not fair. He should be able to wear pink anytime that he wants. We could go to those 9th graders calling him those names and challenge that behavior. That could help. let's look at this bystander group. And it was the seniors who said, we don't want people to feel like that they have to wear a certain color to school or not get paid. Like, that's not what our school's about. And I'm paraphrasing for them. Their quotes were much better. I think it was something just like, doing this over the color pink is so stupid. I think that was one of the quotes. So the seniors went home, they made some phone calls, and the next day all the seniors went to school wearing pink. And just setting that dynamic of like, this is what our school is like. And this, you're coming in as 9th graders, and just be aware you can wear what you want. And knowing that the people who are not immediately impacted have the most power in shaping the culture. Cyberbullying is real. It happens. It's emotionally exhausting. And in a time of COVID where things already feel so isolating, it can really escalate. You don't always know who it is. It can go on from anywhere. And people, when they're bored, can make bad decisions. And there's a lot of people who are bored right now. And so being aware that with cyberbullying, again, there are resources out there for you. And that when we think about that ripple effect, that legacy, Lin-Manuel Miranda, who is a personal hero of mine, who does a lot of writing for musical theater, including Hamilton, he talks about the fact we're only alive for a bit of time in the grand big picture of things. So what do we do with the time we're given? How do we create a legacy that is kind? How do we create a legacy that's understanding? How do we create a legacy that goes from bystander to upstander? And when one person does speak up against cyberbullying, about, making someone who's been treated that way feel less alone, reach out to the person who's been attacked, it sends a positive ripple. And so we don't want to use platforms as weapons. We want to use them tools to make people feel better about themselves and to feel better about the world around them. Being aware that consent, when we talk about consent, a yes is only a yes if the person is capable of giving a yes. So we're talking about bodies, and we're talking about comfort. Age plays into that. Ability, power, alcohol, drugs. If someone is a teacher or a coach and they're engaging in what they consider to be a relationship with a young person, it's not a relationship, it's abusive, because they're in a position of power, they're older, and they're using their position of power to make someone do things that they otherwise, it's not a level playing field. And if someone doesn't want to consent to anything that's sexual, you don't have to explain the why. The no is allowed to stand on its own. You don't need apologies, explanations, or excuses. So know your resources as we wrap up. If a friend reaches out to you for help about things that are making them feel safe, you might feel like you owe it to them to keep it a secret. You don't have to. You can be a good friend and ask for help at the same time. Most people who are reaching out are looking for resources, are looking for help. And yep, they might be mad at you for a little bit of time, as I'm not saying to share it with a group of friends in a friend circle. I'm not saying to put it online. You want to respect their privacy, but you can respect their privacy while getting other people as point people to help you and to help them navigate it. Be aware that secrets might cause more harm to your friend. And our friends will sometimes disclose to us because they're seeking help beyond what you can give them. You're not alone. You get to act on your own feelings. And this slide, part of the slide, comes from a colleague of mine and a volunteer of ours, Kaylee Lund. So I just want to give them a credit for putting that together. My last slides here as we wrap up. I said at the very beginning, I work for Jacob Wetterling Resource Center. Jacob was 11 when he was taken from us in Minnesota. And Jacob was a soccer player. He wore the number 11. And so after Jacob died, we made a list of what were 11 things that Jacob was when he was with us. What is his legacy, right? And then asked people to put on an 11 and commit to living out by those 11 traits, so that we're not just focusing on all the things that we shouldn't do, we're also focusing on what we should do. We spend so much time telling people, don't do this, don't do that, don't do that. We forget to say, be generous, be honest, be kind. And so we want to create a culture where that positive ripple effect continues to happen as people live out in a way, live out his legacy and help finish his story in a way that we all can own. Know that there are other training opportunities that you can reach out to us at zeroabuseproject.org to get more information. We have an upcoming training for teens in December on how to support a friend that's struggling, that gets more specific into how do you help a friend who is having a hard time. And then just thank you for believing in this work. Thank you for taking time. We're so thankful for people who are in a place to donate and continue to donate so that we can continue to get these messages out there. We're thankful for our grantors who allow us to do this work. And so if you are able to and want to do a year-end gift, we're always thankful for that. And here's my contact information. We have a 24-hour line, 1-800-325-HOPE, that you can call if you need to talk to an advocate, and we'd love to get you connected with folks who can be helpful. Thanks so much for your time. Stay safe and be gentle with yourself.